The series begins with a character named Norman who lives with his family. Norman is shocked when he finds his father lying on the ground, dead. He calls out for his mother, Norma, who appears calm and reassures him while hugging him. However, Norman is devastated. 6 months later, they move to a new town. Norma buys a new house and hotel, surprising her son. She tells him they will start a new life together and reassures him that everything will be fine. Norman transfers to a new school where he meets Bradley, who introduces him to her friend. Norman is attracted to her and keeps staring at her in class. After the lesson, the teacher talks to him and encourages him to join activities to socialize with his peers. We then learn that Norma has another son besides Norman, but they are not on speaking terms because Dylan, her other son, insulted her. Dylan calls Norma because he has no money, but she refuses to answer and hangs up. When Norman returns home, he finds his mother waiting for him with dinner prepared. However, she becomes upset when he asks her to sign his school activity form and tells him she needs his help at the hotel. Feeling guilty, Norman changes his mind, but Norma angrily signs the paper and walks away. The next day, they start preparing the hotel, but they are surprised by Keith, the former owner of the hotel. We learn that the bank repossessed the property, and Norma bought it from the bank. Keith wants to reclaim his property by any means and argues with Norma and her son, telling them they know nothing about the town or its people. Norma yells at him and throws him out. Later that night, Bradley comes to Norman's house, lying to his mother that they are going to the library. Despite Norman wanting to go out, Norma refuses, leading to an argument where Norman tells her he is not a child and wants to have people in his life. He storms off to his room and sends a message to Bradley, asking her to wait for him. He sneaks out of the window and goes to the party with her. Bradley is shown to be attracted to him, but she is involved with someone named Charlie. During this time, Keith attacks Norma while drunk and rapes her. She keeps calling for her son, but he does not respond. Suddenly, Norman appears and hits Keith on the head, but he doesn't kill him. They tie him up, and Norma gets enraged when Keith tells her she enjoyed it. She loses control and stabs him multiple times, killing him. Call the police because she is concerned about the reputation of the hotel she is about to open. She asks Norman to help her move the body to a room in the hotel until they figure out how to dispose of it. They panic when the police arrive at their house. Norma tries to stay composed while talking to them, explaining that they just moved in and are removing the old carpet. She becomes very nervous when the officer enters the bathroom where Keith is, but he doesn't see him due to the curtain over the bathtub. Norma is relieved when they leave the hotel. The next day, Norman goes to school looking exhausted. He becomes distressed when he sees blood on his shoes. At this moment, Emma appears, and we learn that she is ill. She meets Norman and gives him some pills for his nausea. Later that night, he and his mother go out, hide the body in the car, and throw it into the sea. Norma breaks down, telling him she feels like a failure because she found out about a new road being built that will affect the hotel, making it unlikely anyone will come. Norman calms her down, telling her that he will always stay with her because she is his mother and he will never leave her. This reassures Norma. The next day, she wakes Norman up and shows him the new sign for the hotel, telling him that the road will not be built. The next day, Norma is surprised when Dylan shows up at her house because he has nowhere to stay. We learn that Dylan is Norman's half-brother and that Norma married Norman's father after leaving Dylan's father. This is why Dylan despises his mother and sees her as a whore. Later, Norman leaves the house and meets Bradley, who is shocked to see her father burnt in his car. At the same time, Officer Isaac finds Keith's car parked outside Norma's house. Norma becomes nervous and denies ever seeing Keith or him coming to her house. At school, the teacher asks the students to prepare a presentation together, and Emma asks Norman to work with her, telling him she will come to his house without waiting for his agreement and leaves. Norman then goes to the hospital to support Bradley, but Richard doesn't give him a chance and asks him to leave. We switch to Dylan, who is at a nightclub where he meets Ethan, who is crying over his boss, who we learn is Bradley's father. Dylan talks to Ethan and notices he has a lot of money, so he asks about its source. Emma arrives at Norman's house, reassuring Norma when she learns Emma won't live long. She agrees to study with Norman, who is impressed by Emma's intelligence and her opinions on the poetry they are studying. Emma notices the story Norman found at the hotel and takes it from him because she liked the pictures in it. After Emma leaves, the police arrive and Isaac questions Norma, telling her that people saw Keith arguing with her and her son. Norma becomes nervous and doesn't want to answer his questions because he doesn't have a warrant. Norma exploits Isaac's attraction to her, who is a colleague of Alex, and decides to get closer to him. She tells him about her situation and says she just wants to live peacefully with her son. Isaac informs her that Keith was Alex's close friend. That's why he wants to know what happened. He then asks her to attend a local celebration and meet him there. Norma agrees and starts preparing, telling Norman about her plan. Her son becomes jealous and doesn't want her to go out with the officer, but Norma convinces him, saying she needs to do this. The next day, Norman goes to Ethan, agrees to hire Dylan, and asks him to carry a weapon. When Dylan returns home, he fights with Norman because Dylan called their mother a whore over the phone. Norman Norman defends his mother and wants to kill his brother, but Dylan overpowers him and injures him. When Norma returns home, she sees the wound on her son's face. Norman tells her that she must make Dylan leave the house. Later, Emma calls Norman and asks him to meet her at her father's shop because she has something important to discuss. When he arrives, she tells him that she researched the book she took from him and shares the story about the girls in it. They were 3 Chinese girls who illegally migrated to America, thinking they would work as maids until they gained citizenship, but they were forced into prostitution. One of them died. They were made to bury her themselves. Emma says she knows where the grave is and asks Norman to come with her to verify the story. It becomes apparent that Emma is attracted to him as she gets closer and kisses him. Meanwhile, Norma asks Dylan to leave the house, but she hesitates when he threatens her about the death of Norman's father, suggesting he was murdered, not dead of natural causes. The next day, Norman and Emma go to the place where the grave is supposed to be. They find a field growing weed, and suddenly armed men appear and chase them. While running, Emma sees the grave and confirms the story is true, but Norman doesn't give her a chance to linger, and they escape quickly from the armed men. The next day at school, Emma admits to Norman that she wasn't initially interested in the story and used it as an excuse to spend time with him. She feels guilty after seeing the grave and realizing the story is true. Norman, however, doesn't want to talk about it, saying it's just a story, and leaves her to go to class. Shortly after, he falls ill and starts hallucinating characters from the story, then suddenly faints. The teacher finds him and takes him to the hospital, but the doctors can't determine the cause of his fainting and tell Norma that they will run some scans to find out. Norma returns home because the workers are at the hotel. After she leaves, Bradley arrives at the hospital to check on Norman, who learns that her father is still in a coma and will die. Bradley feels that Norman understands her because his father is dead. Meanwhile, Norma panics when the police raid the house with a search warrant. She quickly returns to the hospital and discharges Norman because she is worried about him. As soon as Norman arrives home, he rushes to his room and searches for Keith's belt that he had hidden under the bed but can't find it. He breaks down and tells his mother the truth. Norma leaves Norman and meets with Isaac to find out if he has the belt. She finds him busy at work and unable to talk to her. He reassures her and asks her to come to his house later. Norma confirms that he has the belt and prepares to meet him at the appointed time. Isaac reveals that he has the belt and that no one else has seen it. Norma thanks him but realizes he wants to start a relationship with her in exchange for his protection. Meanwhile, Dylan is with Ethan, and we learn he will be working with him in the weed business. When Dylan returns home, he finds Norman sitting alone and talks to him calmly. He learns that Norman was in the hospital and suggests he leave the house because their mother is suffocating him and what she's doing is unhealthy. Norman feels relieved, sensing that his brother cares about him, and apologizes for wanting to kill him. Dylan laughs and says their family is a mess. The next day, Emma talks to Norman, insisting they need to inform the police. Norman gets upset and tells her he doesn't want to get involved in any trouble, arguing that the truth won't help anyone. The girl in the story will still be dead. She will remain sick. He will stay the same. Realizing his mistake, Norman apologizes to Emma and quickly leaves. When he returns home, he imagines his mother talking to him, blaming him for what happened and saying he needs to fix it. Norman listens to her and breaks into Isaac's house to retrieve the belt. While searching the house, he finds a girl locked up, looking exhausted and pleading for his help just as Isaac arrives. Before Norman enters the house, his brother sees him and doesn't understand what's happening, but decides to protect him. Dylan knocks on Isaac's door, pretending to ask for directions to the nearest gas station. While Norman tries to escape, the kidnapped girl grabs Norman, begging him to help her. Norman promises to come back for her and escapes quickly. When Norman returns home, Dylan is waiting for him and asks why he was at the officer's house, saying he saw and saved him. Norman refuses to explain and walks away. The next day, he goes to Emma to tell her what happened, but she is sick and her father refuses to let him in. Before Norman leaves, her father stops him and reveals that Emma is very fond of him, asking him not to hurt her. Norman promises not to harm her. Meanwhile, Norma is with Isaac, and Dylan sees them together, feeling very upset, especially when he learns that his mother is in a relationship with the officer. He questions her about the relationship and asks her to be careful because he doesn't trust Isaac. Isaac sees Norman walking and calls out to him. Norman gets scared and tries to run, but fails. Isaac stops him and talks about his relationship with his mother, saying he loves her, wants to get to know him. He invites Norman to go hunting with him so they can get acquainted. Norman feels compelled to agree and goes home to tell his mother about the girl Isaac has kidnapped, explaining that Isaac is forcing the girl into sex. However, Norma doesn't believe him and thinks he's imagining things, as Norman has a history of hallucinations. She becomes convinced when he tells her that she asked him to go to Isaac's house. Doubting himself based on his mother's words, Norman reaffirms his belief when he sees the wound on his foot the next day, caused by his escape from Alex's house. He tells his mother again, but she still doesn't believe him. Having searched Isaac's house and found no one, she forces him to go hunting with Isaac, but Norman is uncomfortable and distrustful of Isaac. At this time, Alex calls and informs him that they they found Keith's hand and identified it by the watch he was wearing. Norman is terrified and rushes home to inform his mother, who tries to reassure him, but the police suddenly knock on the door. Isaac asks her to come to the station with him. Alex interrogates her, urging her to confess because they found carpet fibers on Keith's hand, and it would be easy to match them to the carpet she replaced. Norma adamantly denies the accusations, especially since she is sure Alex hasn't found the location where she disposed of the carpet. Once released, she and Norman go to the place where she discarded the carpet, but she can't get inside and breaks down crying. Her son tries to comfort her but becomes frustrated, blaming her for their situation because she didn't report to the police. Norma remains distraught until they return home. Norman sits with Dylan and tells him the whole truth. While they talk, Bradley sends Norman a message, and Dylan encourages him to visit her. Norman takes his advice and ends up spending the night with Bradley. In the morning, Norma wakes up and panics when she doesn't find Norman at home. She becomes furious and hits Dylan when he tells her where Norman is. At that moment, the police arrive and arrest Norma for Keith's murder. Norman is shocked when he returns home and learns of his mother's arrest. He and Dylan visit her in jail, where they tell her she can be released on bail. They promise to help her, but Norma, distraught, yells at them to leave. Determined to save her, Norman searches for the hotel papers to mortgage it and use the money to bail her out. Meanwhile, Dylan asks Ethan for a loan to rent a house for him and his brother. In jail, Isaac brings food to Norma and urges her to eat, but she refuses. Norman confesses to Emma that he saw the girl from the story at Isaac's place, but he refuses to go to the police until his mother is released. The next day, Norma is released, but doesn't want to talk to Norman. She remains upset with him until they visit the lawyer, who tries to convince her to admit that he assaulted her, which is why she killed him. Norma refuses and insists on denying the accusation. After leaving the lawyer's office, Norman tries to talk to her and apologizes for not being home, but his mother stays upset, especially when she learns that Dylan encouraged him to get involved with Bradley. She gets even more annoyed when Norman defends his brother, prompting her to kick him out of the car and leave him behind. Dylan sees Norman alone and gives him a ride home. He tells Norman that he's looking for a place to stay and will take him along if their mother goes to jail. Norman becomes anxious and says he can't leave their mother alone. Later, Dylan meets with Ethan, who lends him money because he trusts him. Dylan is deeply moved by this gesture. Suddenly, a man appears and shoots Ethan. Dylan tries to save him by rushing him to the hospital, but flees out of fear of the police. Dylan sees the man who shot Ethan, chases him down with the car, and kills him. Meanwhile, Norma meets Isaac and is upset when he says they need to stop seeing each other. She leaves the car, but Isaac stops her and confesses his love, saying he was very worried about her. Norma is touched and hugs him. Isaac decides to help her by stealing the only evidence against her after disabling the cameras. The next day, the lawyer informs Norma that the case has been closed due to a lack of evidence. Norma is thrilled and tells Norman, who becomes upset when he learns that Isaac was the one who helped her. He storms out of the house and finds Emma waiting for him. He asks her to take him somewhere far away. When they arrive, Emma talks about what she discovered in the Asian girl's case, but notices that Norman is distracted, constantly checking his phone. He admits that he is involved with Bradley, who hasn't been responding to him after he stayed at her house. Emma is shocked and cries, but tries to act normal. She tells Norman that she found the location of the Asian girl, having discovered that Keith owned a boat and suspecting that Isaac is hiding her there since he and Keith were partners. They search the boat and indeed find the Asian girl. Norman takes her to the hotel, and Norma is surprised to see Emma's car. When she enters, she sees the girl. Norman tells her that he wasn't imagining things and that Isaac has been kidnapping Asian girls and forcing them into prostitution. Norma is stunned when the Asian girl sees Isaac's picture and recognizes him. Norma leaves the girl and gets in her car to confront Isaac with the truth. However, her son catches up with her and stops her. She breaks down and tells him that she must stop Isaac. Norman reassures her, saying they will catch him but need to think carefully. The next day, Dylan meets Gil, the boss, and tells him what happened to Ethan. Dylan is surprised when the boss praises him, saying he did the right thing. Gil instructs Dylan to get rid of the car, telling him the place and method to do so. Dylan follows his instructions and burns the car to eliminate any traces. Meanwhile, Norma checks on the Asian girl and finds her sleeping. She is deeply moved when she sees the wounds on the girl's body. Norma then returns home and talks to Emma, who wants to call the police immediately. Norma stops her and convinces her to wait until the next day, allowing the girl to rest. Emma agrees and asks if she should call her mother. Norma learns that Emma's mother left her 8 years ago because she couldn't cope with her illness. Norma is very moved and tells Emma she always wanted a daughter like her. Emma hugs her tightly before leaving. After Emma leaves, Norma tells Norman that they won't call the police until they find the belt. She prepares to go to Isaac's house to search for the belt that threatens them, but Dylan stops her and promises to retrieve it. Dylan and Norman go to Keith's boat and search for the belt. During During their search, Dylan asks Norman about their father's death, trying to convince him that their mother killed him for the insurance money. Norman doesn't want to believe it. Eventually, they find the belt and throw it into the sea. Dylan then tells Norman that he has rented a house and asks him to pack his things so they can move. At that moment, Isaac arrives at Norma's place, wanting to get involved with her. Norma feels forced to agree to prevent suspicion. However, Isaac hears a noise from the next room, and Norma lies, saying a painter is staying there. While they talk, the Asian girl opens the door and is shocked to see Isaac, then runs away. Isaac chases her. Dylan returns and informs his mother that his brother will live with him. Norma is shocked and tells them Isaac was there and is chasing the girl. She asks Norman why he wants to leave her, but her sons are worried about her and ask her to come with them. While they are talking, Isaac arrives, points a gun at them, and forces them into the house after taking the gun from Dylan. Isaac becomes enraged, hitting and yelling at Norma in front of Norman, who dissociates from reality and knocks Isaac to the ground. At that moment, Dylan intervenes, grabs the fallen gun, and shoots Isaac. However, Dylan gets injured and he runs out of bullets, forcing him to hide in a room. Meanwhile, Norman faints and his mother tries to lift him and get him to the car. She collapses when she realizes she left the car keys inside the house. She is terrified when she hears gunshots and sees Isaac coming out of the house, only to fall to the ground and die. She is relieved to see Dylan emerge from the house and runs to hug him. She then tells him she called the police. Dylan suggests they confess the truth to put an end to all the lies. His mother tells him he doesn't know the full story and decides to tell him what happened the day Norman's father died. She explains that they were fighting as usual when Norman's father attacked her. Norman, who was present, hit his father on the head with a blender, killing him because he was not in his right mind. Norma then took Norman to his room, moved the body to the basement, and staged everything to look like an accident. Norman later woke up with no memory of what happened. Norma tells Dylan that his brother is innocent and needs protection. As they talk, the police arrive, and she offers Dylan the choice to flee or stay and help them. Alex arrives, and Norma, in a breakdown, tells him the entire story. She is shocked when Alex suggests she should claim that Isaac was the one who killed Keith and threw him into the sea, and that she killed Isaac because she suspected he was corrupt. Norma agrees immediately, feeling relieved that the ordeal is finally over. She hugs Norman tightly, happy to be free of the burden. Dylan feels left out, but says nothing. The next day, she prepares breakfast for Dylan and treats him kindly until he tells her that he is moving out. Norma becomes upset, saying she didn't expect this from him. Despite this, Dylan helps out by taking out the trash. At that moment, a man named Joe arrives, asking about Keith. Dylan informs him that Keith is dead and that they are the new owners of the hotel. At school, Norman sees Bradley talking with her friends and tries to talk to her, but she ignores him. As the hotel opening approaches, Norma attempts to promote it, but is shocked to discover that the hotel's reputation has been tarnished by the crimes that occurred there, known by everyone in town. Joe checks into the hotel, and Norma is pleased to have a guest, so happy that she forgets to take his details. Dylan becomes worried when he realizes the new guest is the same person who asked about Keith, prompting him to take Joe's information. The next day, Dylan meets Bradley, and Norman is with him. Bradley ignores Norman again and asks Dylan if he works with Gil. Dylan is surprised to learn that Bradley's father worked with his boss. Later, Emma goes to see Norman, but he refuses to meet her, which deeply upsets her and garners Norma's sympathy. Norma invites Emma to join her in shopping for hotel supplies, hoping to cheer her up. Norma learns about Norman's relationship with Bradley and becomes upset when she sees her. She decides to talk to her son, warning him about Bradley and telling him that he doesn't know her well enough to get involved with her. Norman gets irritated when he finds out that she hired Emma to work at the hotel and accuses her of trying to make him fall for Emma by any means. He leaves and goes to Bradley, telling her he knows she is also attracted to him and that what happened between them affected her as much as it did him. Norman is shocked when Bradley tells him she has no feelings for him and that what happened between them was fleeting. He feels hurt when he realizes she doesn't want to be with someone like him and leaves. He keeps repeating his mother's words to himself but calms down when Bradley hugs him and apologizes. Meanwhile, Norma is delighted when Joe offers to bring clients to the hotel, as he has many friends who could book all the rooms. Back at home, Norman finds the dog he had been caring for lying on the road. Suddenly, a car appears and hits the dog. Devastated, Norman yells at his mother, asking her to take him to Emma's father. He then cries and admits he was wrong and that she was right, and Norma hugs and comforts him. Norman goes to Will, Emma's father, to have the dog preserved. He becomes fascinated with taxidermy and decides to learn it from Will. Meanwhile, Emma overhears Bradley's friends making fun of Norman in the school bathroom. She decides to defend him, revealing that Bradley had a relationship with him. Bradley gets upset and asks Norman not to talk about it, explaining that she is in a relationship and doesn't want anyone to know. Feeling hurt, Norman leaves school and ignores his teacher's attempts to stop him. At the same time, Norma prepares Joe's room and becomes nervous when he asks about Isaac and whether she was close to him. Norma denies any connection and quickly leaves. weeks. She then goes to Alex and asks for his help regarding the new road construction. Alex refuses her request, stating that there is no relationship between them that would justify her asking for this favor. Disheartened, Norma leaves, only to receive a call from the school principal informing her that they need to discuss her son's behavior. The principal tells her that Norman will be suspended for 3 days and will need to see a specialist. Norma refuses and insists on taking him to a private psychiatrist instead. Norman talks to Emma, asking why she told the girls about his relationship with Bradley and also told his mother. Emma becomes flustered and apologizes, unable to defend herself or explain what happened. The next day, Norman apologizes to his mother and promises that what happened will not happen again. Norma tells him he must see a psychiatrist, especially after learning he wants to learn taxidermy, fearing it will make him even more eccentric. She accompanies him to Will's place and feels reassured when Will says that Norman is talented and encourages her to let him pursue his passion. Norma agrees and returns home, only to see Joe driving away. She follows him to Keith's boat and watches as he searches it. She is terrified when he notices her and tells her that she knows what he's looking for, asking about something she genuinely has no knowledge of. Scared, she runs away from him. The next day, she goes with Norman to the psychiatrist, but she doesn't let him speak, answering questions on his behalf. The psychiatrist realizes that she is the source of her son's problems, but Norma refuses to accept this, believing she has the right to control her son. Back home, Norma demands that Joe leave the hotel immediately and feels relieved when he finally does. Meanwhile, Emma talks to Norman and confesses the truth about why she revealed his relationship with Bradley. She explains that she did it to defend him because she sees him as special. Despite this, all she wants is to remain friends and not lose him. Norman is moved and apologizes for his anger, making Emma happy, and they hug. Norma is pleased when Dylan brings workers to stay at the hotel, telling her they will be there for 2 weeks. Unbeknownst to her, these workers are involved in the weed business with Gil. Overjoyed, Norma asks Dylan to go out to dinner with her, and he agrees. She goes to her room to get ready and is shocked to find a body on her bed. The police arrive and take the body away. Norma loses her temper and demands that her sons throw the mattress in the trash. She then scolds the workers for smoking weed and bans them from doing so. The next morning, Norman wakes up frightened after dreaming about killing Bradley. Bradley coincidentally runs into Dylan and asks for his help to access her father's office. Dylan agrees to try and speaks to Gil, but Gil's reaction reveals that Bradley's father caused him significant losses, making Gil refuse to hear his name. Norma decides to sell the hotel and move away, especially after receiving flowers from Joe with a card saying he will see her soon. She also spots his car in front of the hotel. That night, she calls Alex after the flower incident, and he informs her that they have no information on Joe and that his details are non-existent. He assures her that he will send patrols to guard her house. Norma starts looking for a new place to move, but Norman refuses, saying he loves this place and doesn't want to move again. He becomes very upset, accusing her of being crazy. They are interrupted by Emma, who appears to be high after one of the workers put weed in her sweets. During this time, Dylan helps Bradley sneak into her father's office behind Gil's back. Bradley breaks down when she finds letters in the office, revealing that her father was cheating on her mother. At night, Norma asks Norman if she can sleep with him because she's still scared after finding the body in her room. She is pleased when he agrees and reminisces about when he used to sleep with her as a child, watching TV together. The next day, Norman goes to school and tells his teacher he won't publish the story he wrote because his mother disapproves. Norman becomes nervous when the teacher gets close to him, revealing her attraction to him. Meanwhile, Norma is shocked to learn that she would lose half her money if she sold the hotel, making her very frustrated. Suddenly, Joe appears and threatens her with a gun, revealing that Isaac had $150,000 and demands she return the money. Although surprised, Norma agrees. At school, Norman asks Emma to go to the dance with him. She initially refuses, thinking he pities her, but eventually agrees. Norma decides to carry a gun for protection and asks Dylan to help and teach her. He worries for her and refuses. At the same time, we see Alex entering a garage, taking a bag of money and leaving. Norma visits the psychiatrist without her son. The doctor begins talking to her about her childhood, but she can't remember much. Suddenly, she becomes anxious and leaves. Later, she meets Dylan, who brings her a gun and agrees to teach her how to use it. He becomes concerned when she accidentally fires the gun, but she keeps practicing until she succeeds. Dylan is pleased with her progress and calls her mom for the first time, deeply affecting Norma. She starts crying and confides in him about her fears, and he reassures her, asking her to trust Alex. A little later, Dylan goes to the hotel and asks Norman about Dylan, who meets her and gives her some of her father's belongings. Norman overhears their conversation and becomes very jealous, even getting upset with his mother over his socks. Dylan realizes the reason for his anger and explains that he is helping Dylan return her father's things. However, Norman remains upset and pretends not to care, saying he doesn't doesn't mind if they get together. After getting ready and waiting for Emma, Norma talks to Norman and decides to tell him about her childhood. She reveals that her brother used to rape her when she was young. The scar on her leg happened when their father walked in on them, causing her to run. The iron fell on her leg. Norman breaks down and feels deep sorrow for his mother, hugging her and apologizing for what she went through. Norma cries and says she needed to tell someone the truth. As they talk, Emma arrives and they head to the dance, feeling awkward. At the dance, Norman sees Bradley, can't stop looking at her, which Emma notices and becomes very upset. She tells Norman that she was foolish to think he would like her and confess his feelings, then leaves him in the middle of the dance. Afterward, Richard asks to speak with Norman and warns him to stay away from Bradley, accusing him of taking advantage of her father's death. Richard then punches him and leaves. Bleeding, Norman exits the dance and is seen by his teacher, who offers him a ride and tells him she will take him to her house to treat his wound. Meanwhile, Norma prepares to meet Joe and takes a gun with her. She's surprised to find Alex with Joe and a bag of money. Alex offers Joe a deal to work with him, taking half the money. It is revealed that Joe is involved in trafficking Asian girls for prostitution, and that Keith and Isaac were working with him. Norma decides to kill Alex, thinking he is corrupt, but is shocked when Alex suddenly shoots Joe and throws the money into the water. He then calls out to her, revealing he knew she was there all along, and tells her to go home, showing that Alex is actually clean and was setting up Joe. We go to Norman, who is at his teacher's house. She tries to seduce him by going into her room and leaving the door open so he can see her changing clothes. At this moment, Norman imagines his mother warning him that the teacher left the door open because she wants him to come in. His mother then tells him that he knows what to do. We see Norman fleeing the house and running to his mother, hugging her tightly. He tells her that he remembers nothing except being at his teacher's house and then running out. Norma comforts him, assuring him that everything will be okay. Believing her, they enter the house together. Later, we see the teacher murdered in her home, revealing that Norman, in a dissociative state, killed her without being aware of his actions.